The Silent Brothers. John and Robert Hessian, brothers and bachelors, sat together after supper in their house in Oldcastle Street, Bursley. Both brothers were wearing black because of the death of their older sister 3 months ago. Maggie, the servant, came in to take the supper things off the table. "Leave the coffee, Maggie," said John, the elder brother. "Mr. Liversage is coming to visit."
"Yes, Mr. John,"
said Maggie. "Slate, Maggie," said Robert.
"Yes, Mr. Robert,"
said Maggie. The slate was on a table near the fire. Maggie gave it and its pencil to Robert. Robert wrote, "Why is Liversage coming?" and he pushed the slate across the table to John. John wrote on the slate, "I don't know. He telephoned. He said he wanted to see us tonight." And he pushed the slate back to Robert. John was 42 years old, and Robert 39. They were tall, dark men, and both were well and strong, and there was nothing wrong with their hearing. 10 years before, the brothers had a quarrel. The quarrel was a stupid one, like many quarrels. The morning after, Robert did not answer when John said something to him. "Well," said John to himself, "if he doesn't speak, I won't speak." And then Robert thought the same thing. Maggie was the first to see that the brothers were not speaking. Then it was their best friend, Mr. Liversage, the solicitor, and some of their other friends, but nobody said anything to them. The people of Bursley thought it was funny and wanted to know which brother would win the quarrel. So Bursley watched the two men carefully, waiting for one of them to speak. But for 10 years, the brothers went on living together in the same house, and neither man spoke a single word to the other. Life without words was very difficult for the brothers, but it was also difficult for their servant. Maggie gave them the slate because it was easier for her when the brothers wrote things down. It was difficult for their friends, too. They began to be a little bored when, at parties, each Hessian talked to everybody in the room, but not to his brother. There was just one thing wrong with this beautiful quarrel. The brothers worked together in the same pottery factory, and sometimes they needed to speak on business. But they spoke very coldly, and only inside the factory walls. And every evening, Bursley watched the two brothers while they walked home. One man 5 meters behind the other. How stupid it was! But Bursley said nothing. The conversation, by slate, that evening was just finishing, when there was a knock at the door, and Mr. Powell Liversage came in. He was an old friend of the two from their school days. He was also a bachelor, so his evenings were free. He came to see the Hessians every Saturday night, and usually John or Robert went to see him on Wednesdays. But today was Thursday. "How are you?" asked John, lighting a cigarette. "Well," replied Liversage. "How are you, Powell?" asked Robert. "Not too bad. And you?" He sat down and Robert gave him a cup of coffee. "Well," said Liversedge after a minute. He sounded a little uncomfortable. "We've found your sister's will, at last." "You haven't. When?" asked John. "This afternoon. It was with some old papers in the bank. Did you know that she had more than £12,000? "No," said Robert. The brothers knew that their sister, Mrs. Mary Bott, was rich. They knew that she had no children, and they knew, of course, that they were her only brothers. When she died 3 months ago, nobody could find her will. And now here it was. £12,000 between 2 people was a lot of money for each of them. But what did the will say? The 2 men wanted to know very much. But did they ask the question? Oh, no. Neither man wanted to be the first to speak. And so they sat in silence. "Do you want me to read the will to you?" asked Liversedge at last. "Yes," they both answered. Liversedge took the will out of his pocket. "Now, I didn't make this will," he said, "so please don't get angry with me." This is what he read. "You are both very stupid, John and Robert, and I've often said so. Nobody understands why you quarrelled like that about Annie Emery. Your life is difficult, but you've also been very unkind to Annie. She's waited 10 years already. So, John, if you marry Annie Emery, I shall give all my money to you. And Robert, if you marry her, I shall give it all to you. And you must be married in 12 months' time. And if neither of you marry her, then I give all my money to Miss Annie Emery, businesswoman of Duck Bank, Bursley. Mary Ann Bott, widow." "There, that's all," Liversedge finished. "Let me see," said John. Liversedge gave him the will, and he looked at it carefully. Robert walked round the table and looked at the paper in his brother's hand. All 3 men were silent for a few minutes. Each was afraid to speak, and even afraid to look at the others. "Well, I must go," said Liversedge, standing up. "I say," said Robert, "you won't say anything about this to Annie, will you?" "I will say nothing," agreed Liversedge. But it was wrong of him to say this, because Annie already knew. The 2 brothers sat and thought for a long time. 10 years before, when Annie was a woman of 23, without family, she started a business for herself, which was a bookshop. John was in love with her, but so was Robert. And the 2 men quarrelled. They said very unkind, very unbrotherly things, and they were both very angry. Because of this, and because they were stupid, they each decided not to marry Annie. Each man wanted to show the other that he